If you read the slide, it is self-explanatory. There's a notebook and a pen in your package. You have to just write down your name, what your views, what your observations are, and leave it in your seat. Kindly settle down. I will request the opening session speakers to come up. General Roy Choudhury, sir. Your Excellency Ma Zangu, please come up to the podium. Mr. Kaul. This is just an announcement for the audience that each session will be chaired by a person. All the introduction of all the speakers are there in the brief with you. In many cases, the abstracts are there too, and you can read them. There will be a final interaction session before lunch. There will be no interaction after each session. Please sit down. His Excellency Ma Zangu, the Consul General of China in Kolkata, has a tight schedule. He has to leave for another important function after his talk, so we will start right away. May I request General Roy Choudhury, our former chief, to come and give his inaugural and welcome address.
General Roy, and good morning, my fellow panelists, distinguished panelists on stage, and good morning to the audience. It's a great pleasure for me to come here and be asked to deliver the inaugural address to this distinguished audience, which is, I noticed, gradually filling up. I would have liked some of the younger people to be here. I saw a couple of young people. I hope more will come because this is a benefit to you. You should listen to the older generation and learn about the world around you because the world is changing very rapidly. So, first, to my fellow panelists, the Consul General of the People's Republic of China, welcome. Personally, I have chosen as my theme, the title of the subject is quite long. I prefer to call it India and China Beyond 2016. Up to 2016, we have to progress now. We cannot be slaves to our history. And I think we are doing that. We have to respect each other's point of view and progress, and we will be progressing. I do believe India and the People's Republic will be progressing more or less in three parallel streams. We have to progress on the stream of cooperation, competition, and also on certain issues because they run into each other. What shall I call it? Confrontation. That theme is always there. Unfortunately, that will take some time to remove, but we are progressing, I'm glad to say. Firstly, cooperation. And the first theme of cooperation between India and the People's Republic of China would naturally be the major issue, the border issue. We have to resolve it. There is no other way. We have to move forward. We have to resolve it. This is a baggage of history which we have to move on past beyond this. We have to further liberalize peoples to people cooperation. That is the best way to move on. In China, as it is in India, the generations are changing. People like us are on the way out. We're already moved off the stage. We get called to share the benefits of whatever experience we may have gained, but we have to cooperate and move on. The younger people must interact. I do not know whether we have developed sufficient opportunities for that. I think we should develop more. The next stream on which we have to progress is a stream that exists, competition. We have to cooperate, we also have to compete. It's difficult, but we have to do both. We have to cooperate on certain issues, and on certain issues we will always compete, because we all each have our national objectives. They should overlap to the extent possible, but that is not possible. There will be always areas of competition, and it is good if we recognize it at the beginning and move forward towards achieving it. On the issue of competition with China, mainly economic, India, I think, would like a larger share of finished goods on the Chinese market. We have to move on, and China naturally would like to have as much a share as it can in the Indian market. That's competition. That's the philosophy nowadays in the world. China, in this respect, is ahead of India, and we must recognize it. But it's competition. We should try and compete on equal basis with China, so that we gain access to a share of China's domestic market. In this connection, my experience of conversation with Indian businessmen, Your Excellency, Indian businessmen, is the ease of doing business in China.
You can go off.
Indian business people in India, in conversation, I am no authority on this, I am not a business person, but the ease of doing business in China must improve. China has penetrated the Indian market to a fairly large extent. Indian businessmen feel that the ease of doing business with China should be made easier, and that is an issue which the People's Republic may like to look into. And finally, the third stream. These are three streams which are not parallel, they run across each other. The third stream, confrontation. We don't have to confront each other, but at times it's inevitable. And the first issue on this instant, which really is an irritant, is the partnership of the People's Republic and the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. There is a close partnership which is detrimental to India's strategic and national security interests. It's a fact of life, we've got to face up to it, and how the two great countries, the two ancient civilizations sort this matter out is a matter for maturity, and it is good that the Sino-Indian border, as opposed to the India-Pakistan border, is relatively quieter. I use the word relatively because it is not fully quiet. And we just had a fairly major incident at a place called Daulat Beg Oldie, the Chumar salient. I think there are 8 areas, if I'm not mistaken, if my memory serves me right. My memory also at many times does not serve me right. There are 8 points of difference between the People's Republic and India along the border issue. China and India are undertaking talks on this issue. We do wish the two nations would come to some agreement and sort these out. To the best of my understanding, there are no major issues except one, which I hope the People's Republic is not taking seriously, and that is the issue of Arunachal Pradesh, which China refers to as Zhangnan of southern Tibet. That's the Tawang Tract. That's a major issue, and I urge the People's Republic to address the issue to the mutual satisfaction of both countries. Then the China-Pakistan nexus, the next issue which we have an issue with is the issue of terrorism. Terrorism does not have a religion, agreed, but unfortunately it does have. It's a fact we should recognize. This is the IS, the Islamic State, which is now dominating the world. It is dominating the Western world. It is spreading eastwards. We are experiencing it in India, in Jammu and Kashmir. China is experiencing it, Your Excellency, unless I am very much wrong, in Xinjiang with the Uyghurs. So these are issues I think it is to our mutual benefit to address and see these are sorted out. These are little, it may be, it's a pinprick, but it is a very inflammable pinprick. It may lead to an ulcer. We don't want that. I don't think China wants it. We certainly don't want it. It is in both our interests that we move on and address these issues. The Indian Ocean. The Indian Ocean is everybody. It's a common highway. Chinese ships have got as much right of navigation as Indian vessels. Similarly, Indian vessels, when they move eastwards, past the Straits of Malacca, into the Pacific Ocean, the South China Sea, another flashpoint, I agree, not with India, is with the People's Republic and the United States. But we support freedom of navigation on the world's oceans, and that applies to all the world's oceans, the Indian Ocean, the Arabian Sea, also the South China Sea, and the East China Sea, and the North China Sea, and the Yellow Sea. Well outside our immediate national interest, which people say is up to the Straits of Malacca, but then it is there. In principle, India supports the right of free navigation on the Indian Ocean. Okay. I thought I'd be hard put to come up to time. Anyway, quickly. So terrorism, I said, there's a whole list of terrorists which I think everyone is aware of. Lashkar-e-Taiba, Islamic State, Jaish-e-Mohammed, Jamaat-e-Islami, Kashmir, I've already said. And finally, the two issues I mentioned at the end, the problem of Arunachal and Zhangnan. In some respects, people in India are not aware of the great Chinese admiral,
Zheng He. Zheng He.
Zheng He, a great name to conjure with in the world which we are not very well aware of. We are aware of the Western navigators who circum Vasco da Gama and all. Zheng He, one of the great navigators in the world, is Chinese admiral. He sailed 3 times around the world? 7 times around the world. With a fleet, not a single vessel, a fleet. Including, so this is a long history that goes back. So we support, just like Admiral Zheng He in his time, we support freedom of navigation in all the seas in the world. The world has changed, we are changing, And I would urge our great neighbor, the People's Republic of China, to also come to an understanding with us. With that, I think I may have exceeded my welcome of the welcome speech. So I'll say thank you once again, Your Excellency. It's a great honor to be here with you. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
I'll request His Excellency.
Chairman, respected General Roy Choudhury, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure and honor for me to attend this future of India-China relations, sponsored by ZSK. And talking about the future of the two very large, ancient, as well as great nations, it is very appropriate. And so, although we have a very important seminar to be started at around 10 o'clock, it is still my duty and my responsibility to squeeze some time to come and to speak to you. I would like to address 4 questions. First is about the current state of China-India relations. It is now in a period featuring very rapid growth and developments of exchanges and cooperation in various fields. First is the high-level visits. We have seen frequent exchanges of visits by top leaders, like by President Xi Jinping, Premier Li Keqiang, and also on the Indian side, the President of India, the Prime Minister of India. There have been frequent visits, and soon you'll see another top-level visits. And also this year, just the day before yesterday, I think, one very important person, the Party Secretary of Shanghai, Mr. Han Zheng, and here they called him Mr. Zheng. I was confused, who is this Mr. Zheng that would come to visit India? And it turned out to be Mr. Han. So we have some cultural difference. Like many people would call me Mr. Zhang Wu. Actually, my family name is Ma. It should be Mr. Ma properly. In China, we emphasize more the family. The individual that belongs to the family comes next. So Ma comes first, and Zhang Wu, my given name, comes next. Okay, Mr. Han Zheng was here to meet Prime Minister Modi, and very soon some other top leaders will come to visit India. And there are also very important government officials and leaders who will come to this part of India. In May, we have at least 3 to 4 governors or vice governors from China that will be in this part of India, visiting Jharkhand, Bihar, and Chhattisgarh. And they will stop in this town, in Calcutta. And of course, they are also increasing, as General Roy Choudhury pointed out, a lot of business delegations coming from China to find opportunities to invest and also to do business with their Indian counterparts. And in Calcutta, you see many Chinese visitors as well. And in Delhi and in many tourist resorts, you will see the vendors, Indian vendors, speak Chinese. And they will say ni hao, hello, and what you like to buy, and it's very inexpensive, and so on and so forth. So of course, I see my French colleague here in Paris. You also have such vendors speaking Chinese. Well, it's a very good sign that China-India relations are developing, and the people-to-people exchanges are increasing very fast, and the business cooperation and the business interchange are on the increase as well. And my old friend told me that there are more China-India marriages now. Girls and boys get married in Shanghai, in Beijing, In Calcutta too, we have one Chinese girl who came here to teach Chinese and fell in love with an Indian boy, and they got married a while ago. So this is a sign that means China, India do have the foundation, do have good sentiments towards each other. Otherwise, there could not have been marriages. This is one kind of criteria to measure
Follow invitation.
the feelings between the two nations. And but there are problems and challenges, as the general has rightly pointed out. The first one, I think, is the insufficient trust, or lack of trust between China
তুমি আমাকে ফোনটা
and
দাও,
India.
আমাকে ফোনটা দাও।
And I hear that a short list
হ্যালো,
of countries and
আমি সুবীর ভৌমিক বলছি।
companies or individuals from countries on that list will be scrutinized very carefully if they come to visit India. And when they apply for a visa, they would take much longer time to get a visa if they would get one eventually. And that's one thing. And second is the exchanges are still not as much as desired or as I want to see. Take the example of Korea, or some people will say South Korea. Korea is a country of 50 million people. India has a population of 1.26 billion people. And the GDP of Korea is about 1.3 trillion US dollars. In terms of PPP, the Indians' GDP is over $7 trillion. And in terms of the exchange, it is still over 2 trillion US dollars. And India is obviously, in terms of population or the size of the economy, much larger a nation than Korea. However, there are over 10 million visitors to Korea every year. And how many to India? Well, last year, barely 1 million Chinese coming, or 1 billion visitors between us. We have about 3 crore Chinese visitors to India and 7 crore Indians going to China. In terms of the flights, well, some people complain the inconvenience of traveling to China, especially when you travel to certain cities or provincial capitals. You don't have direct flights. You could travel from Calcutta to Kunming, but if you travel from Bhubaneswar, there's no direct flight. You have to come to Calcutta. And my colleagues, my friends in Bhubaneswar say, when do you plan to have a direct flight between Bhubaneswar and China? And I say, you have to wait a while. There are only 82 flights between China and India. And guess how many between China and Korea? A smaller, much smaller country? 1,000 per week. 1,000 per week, 82 flights per week between China and India. 1,000 flights per week between China and Korea. So there's a lot of room for the growth, for development. And another challenge we have faced is the news reports. In China, there are a lot of reports, and we always tell them India is a safe place. But the internet articles, the newspapers, they want to sell. So they want to sell something that is striking to the eye. So a lot of reports like fire in India, raping in India, and so forth. And I tell them this is not the whole at all of India. India is a very safe place, and you can come and see for yourself. But there are also reports that also they would have the trains, people sitting on the train, and so forth, sitting on the buses. You do not see in Calcutta, at least. In India, we also have seen reports, not so objective, about China. And a few days ago, there's a report about China supporting a terrorist called Masood Azhar or something like that. Actually, he's a terrorist somewhere, and the Indian government wanted him to be put on the list of the sanction list of the UN Security Council. And then Pakistan did not agree because certain content of the Indian document alleges that Pakistan supported that person. The Pakistani government supported that person. And because of the rules of order of the UN encourages the parties that have a disagreement reach consensus first before they would supply such a kind of application. So China said that India and Pakistan should have this consensus before you submit this to the UN kind of sanction list. And then it's reported simply by the Indian media that China is supporting this terrorist. China is supporting Pakistan and is against counterterrorism. And it's General Roy Duchery generally just pointed out China is a victim of terrorism. And China is firmly against terrorism and supports international cooperation on counterterrorism. Why would you support the terrorists? But it's reported in the newspaper that China supported this guy, supported this terrorism, or supported Pakistan in terms of terrorism and so on and so forth. So we hope that the news reports will be more objective in both countries later on. And also, I hope that countries, the two countries, would take a good kind of attitude, proper attitudes towards each other. These are the kind of challenges we have. Talking about the future prospects for the bilateral relationship is huge. And I can say, with the rise of India, which is happening and which is inevitable. But people talk about the rise of China a few years ago, and now it seems to be a kind of fait complete, a kind of already completed kind of fact. But we are seeing the rise of India very rapidly rising. And so India, in due time, maybe 5 or 10 years or 15 years, India will inevitably become the third largest economy in the world by whatever criteria. So China, the second largest economy, India the third largest economy, and China the largest population, India the second largest population. We will inevitably interact with each other. And I believe in a very positive way. And China-India relations will be one of the most important relationships in the world, if not the most important relationship. And I can say there will be more than 1,000 flights per week between China and India. There will be more than 10 million visitors between us in the future. And this is developing. And the momentum is very good. Although China and India recognized each other soon after the founding of PRC, soon after the independence of India, yet we did not have a uninterrupted momentum or development of relations. We are all aware of the border problem that happened in 1962, and later on the ambassadors were withdrawn, and we restarted the development of the relationship back in the 1980s, and more developments in the 1990s. And then 2 years ago, I think, 2 or 3 years ago, the new era started. And now the development is getting faster and faster. So in 5 years, in 10 years, as General Roy Choi mentioned, the future generation, the younger people. The younger people will, in 10 or 15 years or 20 years, see a very different China-India relationship. A more mature, more developed, richer relationship with a lot of exchanges, personnel relationship exchanges, cultural, economic, and political exchanges, and more cooperation. As the general mentioned, the number one thing is the cooperation. Number two is the competition. The competition always happens, even if you are brothers and sisters. You compete in certain ways, but it should be in a kind of good way, and in a kind of way that would contribute to the benefits of the two countries and to the world. But if there is no competition, like in the market, if there's no competition, it is not good for consumers. And if there is competition, it will be good for the citizens of the two countries and for the world as well. As for the free navigation, I think there's no problem with that for China, either in the South China Sea or elsewhere. But certain countries who claim that they are neutral on the South China Sea issue actually are directly interfering in the question of free navigation. I'm not sure some of my American friends are here, but Dr. General Roy Choi mentioned that this is on the question of South China Sea. China and the United States are against each other. But this is not the view of the United States. They don't think they are, coming out to oppose China. But scholars and experts saying that the United States is heavily involved in many of the kind of disputes, or is sometimes some scholars say that the United States could be kind of mastermind behind certain things. But this is not a place to talk about China-US relations, but back to China-India relations. We will have some differences, like the border issue and some other matters. But with the growth of our cooperation, with the growth of our mutual trust, we can all solve these problems. The problems, as General Roy Choi rightly pointed out, are baggage from history. Now they are at our hands, and we need to solve them. The good thing that China and India have reached an agreement to deal with these issues through dialogue, and we have been able to maintain peace and tranquility along the border for decades, and we believe we are able to do it in the future as well. And through the cooperation, through the increase of our mutual trust, I believe these border issues as well as other issues will be dealt with. Of course, the differences are there, and we say that the area belongs to China, and the Tangnan area belongs to China, and the Union side that is their state, their territory. We can deal with these issues through dialogue, and with the increase of our understanding of our cooperation, our common interests will far outweigh the differences, and then it will be much easier to solve the problems. When you have a big mountain of friendship, of common interests, you will also have a large shadow. And we, China and India, two neighbors, we have a lot of interactions in the history, mostly very friendly and brotherly. Like Huan Zhang, who came here 1400 years ago to learn about Indian civilization, learn about Buddhism, and went back to China. And today, we are very glad that Indian people still remember him, and he's in the textbooks of the children, school children here. And he helped record the places he traveled to in India. And according to his travels, many places, famous places, temples and so on, have been rediscovered in India, like the Mahabodhi temple in Bodh Gaya that was buried and then, according to his record, discovered, and now has become a holy site for Buddhists throughout the world. And what should we do to realize the potentials, to reach the relationship that I just described, to make the relationship the most, or one of the most important relationships in the world? I think that we have done a lot of things, especially many of the friends here who have contributed to the development of the exchanges, of the friendship. In the future, there are still many things to do. First, I think, is to study the other country in depth and try to understand the other country better. Now in India, there are some China experts, but not enough. In China, it is a similar case. We have some India experts, but in the past, there are more European experts or US experts and other experts, but not as many experts and scholars on India in China. And we hope that when there are more students, more scholars studying each other, understand each other. In history, in the past, when Wang Zhang was here 1400 years ago, there were thousands of Chinese studying or traveling in India, not himself. A few years ago, because of the kind of difficulties, there were not many Chinese traveling to India. Even now, more Chinese, as I said, travel to Korea, to Malaysia, to other countries, to Europe, to the United States, and not so many would come to India. And Indians would go to Europe, United States, and other countries instead of China, mostly. So we need to have more attention on the other country and study the other side and understand the other side. So understanding is the number one important thing. People-to-people exchanges. Language study. Some students are learning Chinese here in Calcutta and elsewhere in India. More Chinese are studying Hindi, and some study Bengali. Incidentally, I've been told that we would have some of the best Bengali-speaking people in China, in the universities in China. And more universities are having the courses in Hindi and Bengali. This will help lay a better and more solid foundation for the friendship. And second, there should be more economic cooperation. That is very important. China has a surplus of capital and a surplus of the capacity that could, the excellent capacity that could be shifted to India. We have a lot of technicians, and India is in the great movement for the make in India, stand up India, and so on and so forth. So we could work together. There could be much more economic cooperation. And I can see that in the coming few years, there will be more. And one principle is important, that is win-win, or mutually beneficial. So Chinese coming to invest in India, they should not just make profit for themselves. They should also bring benefits to India. On the other hand, the Indian friends should utilize their investment, but also allow the Chinese investors to make some profits. This is a win-win strategy that would endure and will bring benefits to both sides in the long run. And thirdly, the cultural exchanges are very important. We are very glad that we are in ICCR today, which is focused on cultural exchanges between nations. And right now, Chinese appreciate the Indian cultures, but there are not many Indians traveling to giving performance in China yet. So the Chinese only learn from TV or from some Indian movies what India is like. I hope there will be more that will happen. And also Chinese cultural kind of group troops should also come more to India. And last but not least, the scholars and experts should do their part. And the newspaper, the reporters should also do a better job and should study China in a more in-depth way so that they could write better and more balanced kind of reports, articles about China. I think I have mentioned a few points and there may be some errors and accurate points. I would welcome criticism and comments from my friends here. And I believe that, on the whole, the future of China-India relations will be bright. But as we said in China, the future is bright, but the road may be twisty. So it requires efforts by all of us, friends from China, from India, or friends from other countries as well, to work hard to bring about the dream of a great China-India relationship. Thank you very much.
Speakers who will be speaking later on. It's an honor and privilege to address you today. This is an extremely interesting topic and one that is very close to the ICC because we have been for many years advocating for the east and northeastern parts of the country at various fora all over the nation, outside the nation, and it's very critical for this part of the country to have the India-China relationship firing on all cylinders, and in a very positive framework. There have been two themes that have emerged from the distinguished speakers before me, and in some way they are related because they center around cooperation and competition. And I think from my standpoint, as someone who's involved in industry and in commerce, it's natural to interpret that more about trade and other issues because there is a large amount of trade that is happening. This is projected to grow very fast. It has grown very fast and there's reason for celebration, but there are also certain people who are saying that let's pay a closer watch to this. Let's not try and move too fast. Just looking at the figures, the bilateral trade has grown from $2 billion US in 2001 to about $70 billion in 2014. So that's a staggering increase, and this is growing faster and faster each year. The point I'd like to make is that trade is a driver for globalization. It's one of the critical reasons why we like globalization, and it's one of the reasons why globalization tends to happen. This is critical, not just because of the benefits that accrue from trade. There are substantial benefits to be had from trade. Economists will tell you about the Ricardian analysis that says both countries that are engaged in mutual trade are better off. But there's another component that's perhaps being highlighted in the literature only recently, and that is globalization itself is a force that causes change, that causes prosperity, and causes growth. The renowned economist Bradford DeLong at the University of California in Berkeley has estimated that up to 30% of global prosperity is due to globalization. So if trade drives globalization, and we need globalization for prosperity, I would argue that we cannot have a situation where we stand against free trade, where we erect barriers to trade. This has to go on. Perhaps this figure of 30% is controversial, but even if it was 10%, it's still a very large amount, and it's something which India, as a growing country, cannot afford to ignore. The Own Indian experience, as highlighted a few years ago by a gentleman who is now Vice Chairman of Niti Aayog, Dr. Arvind Panagaria, suggests that the Indian experience on trade has been that trade and growth in India have always been linked. And when India doesn't open its borders, it doesn't engage as a part of the globalizing forces, the country will suffer, the economy will suffer. Our model in the Indian economy has moved from a redistribution-based model to a growth-based model. We have realized, thankfully I would argue, that there is no point in redistributing a very small pie. It's far more important at this stage in our growth cycle to grow the pie and worry about how to allocate this later on. So I would argue then we need trade. Trade does cause winners and losers. There are some negatives to trade. People who were entrenched in a way of doing things will lose out when there are imports of a cheaper nature, of perhaps a better quality, but the gains that accrue from trade perhaps are best used in accommodating these people, retraining them, redeploying capital, and that is the path forward, I believe, for India. Thus, to me, if you look at trade deficits in isolation, I don't believe they're very educative, and I believe they end up sending a confusing message. The trade deficit, especially a bilateral trade deficit, is not something that is very healthy from an economic standpoint to focus on. Looking at the flip side of that, China and the US run a very large trade imbalance. So China exports far more than it imports from the US, but Chinese capital is perhaps one of the largest buyers of US Treasury bonds. So in a way, the trade flows are translated economically into investment flows. Now these bonds are just sitting on Chinese books, but I would argue if we can find a way to have a similar mechanism in India, not where China is investing in Indian Treasury bonds, but where China is an active partner in Indian growth through infrastructure, through FDI, through development, that is really what we need to focus on. So we need to have a mechanism where trade surpluses are not demonized, trade deficits are not alarmed, and a way to actually change the dialogue as to how we can encourage investment into our country. India needs capital, we have a large amount of infrastructure to build, and we need global partners and global capital to help us do that. The other side of it is that China itself is rebalancing its economy. It's going from an investment-fueled economy to a consumption-driven economy. And this rebalancing is expected to take another decade or so. But as a result of these forces, there is a very large and vast domestic market that's created in China. And it's very critical that Indian businesses, especially those that have done very well in the US and in Europe, find a way to reach these consumers and actually get this business. Of course, it's critical, as General has pointed out, that Chinese ease of doing business rules are modified, but perhaps a bigger barrier is language and a feeling that it's easier to do business in the West. I think we as businesses need to reorient ourselves to actually doing more with the East, where traditionally we haven't been very strong. Our IT firms have global scale. They've actually had the benefit of being exposed and in many cases driving global best practices. And as Chinese firms evolve, I am quite confident that these same firms will need Indian service companies to give them IT services, to help drive their banking backends, to help drive the communication backends, And this is something that we need to push in terms of policy, and something we need to push in terms of how chambers of commerce operate perhaps as well. There are other modes of cooperation that perhaps are not as competitive in nature or as competitive in the public thinking. There are issues such as scientific research, economic research, research on low-cost engineering and manufacturing, where both India and China are global leaders. Cultural research also can be explored, and these are areas where, there have been steps taken, but a lot more can be done. A very good example was recently in Yunnan province. There was a conference of medical practitioners under the BCIM, or Bangladesh, China, India, Myanmar framework. And it's very important because this region shares a lot of health-related issues. And by working together, I think best practices can be shared. By working together, knowledge, machines, knowledge of medicines, threats of antibiotic resistance. These are knowledge sharing activities that inherently are confidence building measures. And I think we need to do a lot more of this. In addition to medical cooperation, there are issues of education. India is a proven leader in imparting English language, quality education, and I think we need to build on this, especially in the Northeast, where the BCIM corridor will pass through. We cannot afford to ignore our geographies, and the fact that we share a border gives us an opportunity to engage with a different culture, to engage with different best practices, and accrue gains from this. And I think these kind of gains are the forces of globalization, or forces resulting from globalization, that perhaps the economist I referred to earlier was talking about. And these play a large part in increasing regional, if not global, prosperity. The other thing I would like to point out is that there are forums being built now to share experiences in governance and in theory of how policy should be developed. There's a very interesting paper I read recently that was published by the India-China Institute based out of the New School in New York. And what they've done is they've looked at the reform processes in both countries, they've looked at the development pathways in both countries, and they've also looked at something that's very important and it's become a global buzzword today, which is inequality. So they've actually done and compared what is the inequality experience in India, what is the inequality experience in China, and actually their findings reveal a shared pattern of a greater trans-regional inequality. They reveal a pattern of a greater rural-urban divide, and they reveal a pattern of growing economic impoverishment among certain people in urban areas. So these are themes that are very critical to both countries as we develop. These are themes that policymakers can cooperate on, and again, it's one of the many confidence-building measures that we need to undertake. Then, of course, there's, forgive my language, there's the big elephant in the room, which is, of course, the geopolitical issues and strategic issues. And from the point of view of businesses, this is extremely harmful to have a big question mark hanging over your head. No one is going to invest if there is no security on what is a boundary, what is the actual state of relations between the two countries. So it's very important that policymakers clearly communicate to the business community what the strategic priorities are, what the status of dialogue is, to the extent, of course, it's not covered by secrecy, and what is the overall pathway. And I think we need to have a cross-party, a bipartisan, if you will, consensus on these issues, and it would help if Parliament perhaps was functioning a little more effectively. But I think these debates do happen in Parliament, and it's important through forums like this that this knowledge is disseminated to businessmen. And conversely, I think it's important policymakers listen to businessmen and take actions, because the business community, or I would say the economic activity, is a very strong part of what a country's policy should focus on. So, for example, it's long been an issue in the Northeast about whether the Stillwell Road should reopen or not, and whether a land route into China should be there or not. And I think, and I feel as a chamber, this is something that's good. It helps the people living in that region. When you have increased trade, it actually prevents perhaps illicit trade, but there are very real security issues that will stem from this. So we need to talk about it, but we need to also act. I think the ICC, the Indian Chamber of Commerce, was part of the one-day opening that took place on December 30th of last year of the border crossing, and a Chinese truck actually came through the Stillwell Road into India. It was carrying products for an agri-horti show in Guwahati that the Indian Chamber was organizing together with the government of Assam. So, but this was just one truck, and I believe the road is not really functioning. But we need to have a stronger conversation about this. And I think if you listen to the people who live in that region, they would much rather that this road be open than closed. Just to highlight what the issues could be, I'm going to quote from Professor Rakahari Chatterjee, Emeritus Professor, Emeritus Fellow in Political Science at Calcutta University, and he writes, "When we are planning for enhanced trade and transit across the boundaries of these four states, meaning the BCIM states, are we taking into account the presence of transnational crimes, terror groups and insurgencies, armed smugglers, ethnic divisions, and poverty of the local people?" So I think he's captured all the factors that need to be taken into account. My only submission is that the development of the local people should not be given last priority in this framework. To sum up, I believe that given the realities as they exist today, perhaps the best approach is to continue work on an incremental basis, but to expand the breadth of the engagement to make sure that there are multiple areas in which these small incremental steps are being taken. Track 2 efforts should be given a large thrust. We need to promote bilateral dialogue across large sections of society, not only at the government level. These Track 2 efforts should have the implicit support of governments of both sides. And perhaps we need to look at restarting border trade. It's been a very strong force in the India-Myanmar relationship because people like it. It's a vibrant way to engage with your neighbor next door. And I'm sure if this is expanded with China, it would also help. Trade should not be curtailed, but rather cooperation in these other forums should be tirelessly advocated. Indian businesses need to have a China strategy in place, and chambers of commerce like us need to play a role in bringing China awareness, bringing facts about the Chinese market, and also encouraging, conversely, Chinese to come invest in India, because this is again going to be an important part of the bilateral relationship. We cannot, as I've said before, choose our neighbors, but we can choose whether we're going to work with them or not. And I believe given that choice, it is clear that we have to choose to work with our neighbors, we have to choose to work with China, and we have to take this relationship to a place that is a place of strength for both countries. Thank you very much.
Call for an elucidating talk on the economic issues between the two nations and how we should go forward. At the end of the opening session, I would like to thank General Roy Chaudhary and Mr. Siddhant Kaul for having addressed this House, and I think both have made very telling points. So did His Excellency, the Consul General of China, Madhanu. Thank you very much, sir. Please pick up your memento and our letter of gratitude before you go, sir. At this point, I would request the first session speakers to come up to the podium. We are already approximately, not very much, about 20 minutes behind time, but that doesn't matter. If all the speakers hereafter shave off a minute each, I think we'll be able to make it. Sri Narayanan, Admiral Chatterjee, and Mr. Harsh Poddar. Mr. Harsh Poddar, who will be taking the economics part of it and the international ramifications of an increasingly assertive China on economic front. I'll request the speakers that when they go to pick up the mementos and the letter of gratitude, Admiral Chatterjee, all yours.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. With
The top leadership of Cenerix for inviting me to be present here today to speak on a subject of, I think, absorbing interest, I think, across the world, but of critical importance for us. I would like to start with an apology. I think we've heard a lot of positive statements for the last 1 hour. I think Jayadev and I have lived through I think Kala also, have lived through more difficult times. What was not mentioned as far as my CV was concerned, that I spent 4.5 years of very grueling negotiations with China. China is a great nation. The Chinese are perhaps the most intelligent people on earth. They have a sense of history. They know where they're headed. And they have probably one great advantage over most other countries. Almost, not exactly quite correct, but nevertheless, the longest period of continuous history of civilization, nearly 10,000 years. And therefore, that gives them a tremendous advantage over other countries. When I was the special representative for border talks, and a very delightful Chinese counterpart, Mr. Dai Bingou, who I understand has just written a book in which he has written about his, one big chapter is on his years as a special representative. He's wonderful, he's great, but he's as hard as steel. You can't move him. And that, I think, is something that we need to realize when you deal with China. They think time is on their side, and therefore, while I'll be saying a lot of things, and I hope General Roy will not apply the guillotine, but the fact of the matter is, you must induce a sense of realism into your discussions when you come to China. I know Harsh, I'm using the word Harsh because he's much younger than me, will say about what a wonderful country it is. This is a wonderful country. But we have our interests, and I think we cannot afford to forget this in the concept that we are two great Asian civilizations. We have probably one is 5,000 or 6,000 years and the other is 10,000 years. But the Chinese are not going to give in just because we are friends. Just as an aside, during my period as the NSA, one of the roles that I played was in negotiating the India-US civil nuclear deal. One of the final sticking points in this whole issue was how the International Atomic Energy Agency and the Nuclear Supplies Group would accommodate India. And let me tell you, every single member who was present there, other than China, was willing to accommodate India. And it took a tremendous amount of effort on the part of not merely us, but I think the entire international community to get them to agree. So I'm just mentioning this. They realize what they are where they stand.
They are very clear where they would like to go. So we need to be careful. I mean, there's an Indian tendency to, to be, it could be over-friendly, if I might say so, and sometimes forget our national objectives. So that is the sense that I try to bring to my talk today. It'll appear boring compared to some of the brilliant or scintillating speeches that were made earlier, but I think it's important that we recognize that in improving our relations, we need not to lose sight of the fundamentals of relationship. If there's one country in the world, I think that China has some concern about, I think it's India. And it's not because of GDP growth or that. There is a firm belief in China, and many of them have traveled much longer and been to parts of them. The Chinese believe that the Indians are one of the few nations in the world who can think in linear fashion and spatial. And they think that we have tremendous depths in our capacity, particularly in mathematics and physics. And this is what causes them a great deal of concern. So they may be better than us in manufacturing, they may be better than us, but they have a deep down kind of thing. So we need to keep these factors in mind when we deal with China. So with these rather plebeian introductory remarks, how do I approach the subject that has been given to me about implications for India? I've tried to do this in three parts. One, how is China generally perceived, not merely by India, but by much of the world? This perception, of course, varies from country to country, from continent to continent, and region to region. We then need to juxtapose this perception with what I think is a reality, or at least what we in India, or at least some of us in India, see as the reality of China. I think the strategic implications would then flow from this. Let me start with a perception. China's rise, almost everybody agreed was inevitable, at least until very recently. Because few countries in the world have made such rapid progress in the years, 30, 35 years of continuous growth, etc. What was more difficult to acknowledge or accommodate was the concept of peaceful rise. Given its vast territorial expanse, its transformation as an economic powerhouse, and possessing probably the second or third most powerful military in the world, it looked more like a regional hegemon rather than a peaceful giant. With the result that China has few allies. I mean, Pakistan is of course one, at least as far as the region is concerned. We saw under President Hu Jintao and Premier Wen Jiabao, I think, spectacular growth between the period 2002 and 2012. There was some concern as to what this breakneck speed of growth would mean for the rest of the world, particularly for the Asian region. But I think the real concern has come more recently. President Xi Jinping has been, is quite an enigma to most people. Why is he concentrating all powers in his hands? Why is he trying to push through an agenda, a regional and a global agenda? Why does he display a certain amount of disdain to sensitivities of other countries? And this is accentuating greater assertiveness, bordering almost on aggressiveness. So that is one of the issues in terms of perception. What has it translated into, even at the stage before it becomes a reality, is China is now indulging in what I like to call an excess of virtue. Its uniqueness, its exceptionalism, all claim to derive from its preeminence that it enjoyed in previous centuries. Yet, ladies and gentlemen, do not forget that China has not forgotten its humiliation of recent centuries. It appears determined to retain its place in the world order as one of the leading countries of the world. So in a sense, this is the perception. Now we come to the reality. I know the reality will look different to different people. As General Roy Chowdhury said, I hope there are some young people in the audience who would listen carefully to this. I believe China just refuses to be a status quo power. It's not one that is willing to play by existing rules governing the international order, which are largely dictated by the West. It feels more confident than ever of being able to challenge this order, devise its own rules, and enforce its diktat, especially on countries on its periphery. I know Kalha and Jaydev are here, so pardon me if I make mistakes on when I quote from. I think the 18th Chinese Communist Party Congress, if I remember right, I borrowed it from Jaydev himself at one stage. I think in 2012. I think all students of where China is headed need to go through the what I call the details of this Congress, because I think if you read it carefully, there are something. This Congress highlighted exceptionalism and uniqueness. I think they won't contradict me. Let me say, it said the world's only amalgam of an ancient civilization and a huge modern state. Please understand the significance of this. It thereafter put considerable emphasis on upgrading and expanding China's military capabilities, on the rapid growth of its economic infrastructure, and moving on to what it referred to as a new type of great power relations as far as foreign affairs is concerned. Since then, we have all seen the rapid expansion of the Chinese military. On the economic side, they have embarked on numerous initiatives, establishing an Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, taking a key role in the activities of the BRICS Development Bank, which is located in China, and positioning itself as a key member of the Regional Cooperation Economic Partnership. And then, of course, the OBOR, the One Belt, One Road initiative. In foreign affairs, China's move to a new type of great power relations coincides with the initiation of a need to protect its rather enigmatically mentioned core interests. Quite clearly, the latter demands of China to become more assertive and resist external interference. The short message is clear. We are here on the global scene, and we intend to be, if not the most dominant, at least one of the dominant powers. I know there's a later session on the Chinese military, so I will try to skip over the first part of what I mentioned about the rapid transformation of the Chinese military. But I just want to say that what happened on the 3rd of September last year should be an eye-opener. The entire Chinese military was on display on the 70th anniversary of the victory of the Chinese People's War of Resistance. All the new types of weaponry that they have, the DF-21D anti-ship ballistic missile, the DF-F5B intercontinental ballistic missiles, etc., were all on display. His Excellency Mao was very, if I might say, facile about what was happening in the South China Sea, South China and East China Sea. But I think the evolving strategy in the South and East China Seas carries a lesson for us, or for that matter, all countries of the Asian region to begin with. Here is a nation that is constructing and carrying out infrastructure developments on islands and reefs